kill, burn! Maim, kill, burn!
Hi folks, welcome to another episode of The Happy Heretic, and today we're going to be talking contrast paints. Now, the impetus for this video was a post that I saw on one of the Facebook groups I'm in. I think it was the Trapped Under Plastic Facebook group, but it was a simple question, and that question was, what is the final word on contrast paints? And it's a question that, even though contrast paints are, 2 years old now? Just about, maybe a little bit more than 2 years? I don't know. I don't remember exactly when they came out, and I don't want to bother looking it up on the internet. But yeah, contrast paints. Even though they're about 2 years old, I still see that question popping up as to, what's the final word on contrast paints, or what's the best use for contrast paints, or contrast paints, how do they work? Miracles, yo. I still see that cropping up every now and again on different Facebook groups that I'm in, and I thought I would endeavor to kind of answer that question as to what is the final word on contrast paints. Now, of course, we all remember, or maybe you don't, when contrast paints were first released, Games Workshop billed them as, you only need one thick coat to get a tabletop ready mini, because it does your shading, it settles into the recesses, and it does your highlighting as well. So you don't need to worry about those steps. You just slop it on there and you're good to go. And you definitely can do that. I mean, I've got this mini right here. I've featured this guy in one of my first videos. I'll go ahead and put the link to that in the description below. But this guy right here was painted almost completely with contrast paints. The only thing that isn't contrast paint on him are the metal bits. And even those, I did a wash of skeleton horn to give it kind of that aged, beaten metal look to it. So you definitely can do, and this guy I used the one thick coat method. So you definitely can do that. You can get something that's tabletop ready that you want to throw out there. But you notice this paint job has a lot of flaws in it. There's a lot of weird pooling and things like that. And I think contrast paints are one of these things that it seems like people either love them or they hate them. And I think a lot of that comes from how they were initially advertised. Games Workshop hyped these up, and a lot of people ended up thinking, I think, that contrast paint is talent in a bottle. They're like it's like Nuln Oil, but for base coats and shit like that. So a lot of people were thinking, all I have to do to get a kick-ass paint job is just slap some contrast paint on the mini, and I'm good to go. Well, that's you can get an okay paint job. You can get a serviceable paint job. But are you going to get a good paint job just by slapping one thick coat or even two thin coats of contrast paint on a mini? No. Not right away. As with anything, contrast paints are one of those things that they can look good. They can look amazing. I've seen a lot of people do a lot of really cool things with contrast paints. Juan Hidalgo is probably the guru for contrast paints. His Heavy Metal Contrast series, he does some amazing work, including some non-metallic metal and things like that using contrast paints. But he doesn't just use contrast paints in his videos. He also will go in and highlight and glaze and that sort of thing. He starts with the contrast paints, but he uses different techniques to punch them up a little bit and make them look absolutely amazing. And a lot of people, I think, figured that, if I've got these contrast paints, I don't have to do any work to make a good kick-ass paint job. And I think that pissed a lot of people off when they realized that, there's some applications that contrast paints are not very good for, number one, like, large flat surfaces and things like that. And it also is going to take a little bit of work to get a really good paint job with contrast paints. I mean, like I said, you can, as you've seen, you can definitely slap contrast paints on a mini and, just do the one thick coat or two thin coats, and that's it, and you've got a decent paint job, a halfway decent paint job. You're good to go. It's definitely quicker than doing a traditional way of painting, but if you're expecting to get heavy metal quality out of just one or two thin coats of contrast paint, it's not going to happen. You're going to be sorely disappointed. Now, I use contrast paints fairly extensively. This is not even my full collection of contrast paints. I love contrast paints. I don't use them for base coating so much, unless I'm doing stuff like cloth or fur or feathers or something with a lot of texture to it and things like that. Contrast paints really excel when there's something that you need a lot of texture on. Another thing that I've used contrast paints for lately have been the eyes of my plague marines, particularly this creepy boy right here. This guy is those eyes right there. Those are contrast paint. I actually used a Yandin yellow on a white base coat for this guy's eyes, and that was a mistake because this guy's eyes are the most piercing feature on him now, and they follow you wherever they go. I actually have had to, on my shelf, turn this guy around because his eyes just peer straight into my soul. It's just, it's really creepy. So I use the contrast paints a lot for the eyes on my Plague Marines. I also use them. I've got some Lumineth Realm Lords kicking around. I think I put them all in a box at the moment. But I use contrast paints pretty extensively on my Lumineth Realm Lords. Let me deal with the shaky cam. The Beastgrave Warband, Rippa's Snarl Fangs. I used contrast paints pretty extensively for the leather bits on this guy. I also used Apothecary White to help get the white and gray dirty fur on the wolves, which was actually really fun. A really fun paint job. I actually had a lot of fun doing these guys. And I also use contrast paints on dirt and rocks and bones and things like that. Skeleton Horde in particular is really good for doing aged bone and that sort of thing. And I'll also a lot of times wash metal, lead belcher and things like that with Skeleton Horde because it gives them a very nice aged metal look to it. So that's how I use contrast paints. So anyway, this video is running a little long, but bottom line is contrast paints, the final word. Yes, you can do tabletop writing minis with them easily, no problem. Whether it's one thick coat or two thin coats, whichever way you want to do it, I recommend the two thin coats, which a lot of people will recommend that. You just get better results and there's less weird pooling effects that you get off of that. But are you going to be able to just slap some contrast paints on a mini and get a Golden Demon or heavy metal quality paint job like the hype train kind of suggested when they first came out? Absolutely not. No, you can, but you're going to have to work at it just like everything else. It's going to take a fair amount of work to get contrast paints to that level of painting, just like any other type of paint. So if you use them, I definitely recommend using contrast paints, especially beginner painters, somebody who just wants to get an army done quickly. They're pretty good for that. They can be pretty forgiving too in a lot of ways, as long as you just kind of pay attention to the cooling and things like that. But just manage your expectations going in. Don't expect to just slap some paint on there and get a real kick-ass quality paint job. You're going to have to work at it. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and leave this video right here for now. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments section below. Let me know how you use your contrast paints as well. Are you the one thick coat kind of person where you just slap contrast paints on a mini and call it a day? Do you do two thin coats, or do you take your time with it and use them as a tool to make your mini painting better in general? Let me know in that comment section. As always, if you liked what you heard, leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Both of those things help me out quite a bit, and I will see you all next time.